Alright, so this is my first attempt at recording lectures. Bear with me, I'm sure there's going to be some weird things that I didn't think about when planning this through. So, I figured I'd start off with those generic examples. Remember generics, that was the very last lecture that we covered in class. I said I'd give you some more examples on generics before we move into the new material. And really the next material is just kind of an intermediary point before we start looking at data structures and algorithms. So we're almost to that point in the semester. Hope you're all doing well and staying healthy. Yeah, so keep an eye out on announcements on Blackboard. I opened up that Piazza discussion board, as well as the announcement on Blackboard talking about the things that I'm doing to restructure the class. I'm not going to go over them now, but go ahead and read through those. If you have questions, post on Piazza or email me. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. If you remember generics, right, you used basically a placeholder value when working with types that you didn't know you were going to be working with. So for example, in this case, E or T, or I guess if you go back a slide, E right here, right, your class, you don't know what type your class will be working with. And so what you're using is a placeholder type, and this placeholder type or generic type at compile time will get replaced with, at runtime will get replaced with, compile time. Will get replaced with whatever type is specified by the user of your class. And I went over examples with that in the class. So the first example I'm going to start off with is multiple generics. So yeah, you can specify multiple different placeholder types. So in this example here, I've specified generic type E and generic type T. In this case, I specify a print method where it's expecting an input of type T. And yeah, I'm calling this object .toString. So remember, for generic types, they all must be objects. They can't be a primitive type. And since they're an object, they inherit from the root of all objects, which is the object class, or the root of all classes. Yeah, so this brings up a good point. Generic type T as well as generic type E are class-wide in their scope. Remember, to make the scope to be within the method, we need to declare the generic type as part of the method. You can look back a few slides to look at that. And so yeah, here's how you, external to your class, would specify the types at compile time. So in this case, I specify using these angle brackets, integer, comma, string. Well, integer will be replace E inside of my generic class, which I'm not actually using here. And then string will replace type T. And then what this means is when I try to use the print method, the input object to this print method will have to be a string because I've specified that T should be a string. So I'm going to go ahead and I think the next slide, yeah, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and go over an example of this for you. So first things first, we need to create our main. And inside of our main, we need the standard public static void main string array args. All right, cool. And as is customary, you should always test out your application and make sure it works. So hello world. Let's go ahead and run it. I've already ran this previously with the main, so I didn't have to go up here and run it from up here. But yeah, okay, cool, so it works. Right, so the first thing I'm going to do is create a class. In this case, I'll call it my generic class. Cool. And we're talking about multiple generics here, so let's give it multiple generics. Now, if you remember, I specified that your generic type is really a variable name, and you can name it anything you wanted as long as it's a valid variable name. But the convention is to use single uppercase alphabetic letters. And some of those letters have specific meanings. In this case, I'm going to start off with K and V, where K is talking about a key, usually, and V talks about a value. So you start off by using the angle brackets, and then I'll specify the first generic type K, comma, the second generic type V. So I have K and V. So now what can we do? Well, one thing you can do is your class can hold variables of those types. So for example, I'll specify K, so a variable named key of type K. And actually, I'll go ahead and make this private. And a variable private V value. And I'll go ahead and give my class a constructor. So remember, a constructor has no output, and the name of the constructor has to be the same name as the class that it resides in. So, my generic class, I don't need to specify the generics again. All right. And actually, I want an input to my constructor. Type K, we'll call it key, type V, value. And we'll use this to initialize our key and value. So remember that this implicit parameter is specifying the key variable within my class. And that's how you differentiate, since the input to my constructor here, the parameter name is also key. So that's how you're differentiating between the two. All right, very good. So this isn't particularly useful yet though, because yeah, I've made these variables private. So the first thing we can do is create some getters or accessors. So we'll start with a public, and this is something that's nice to know. You can also return a generic type. So in this case, I'm going to return type K. I'll call it get key. And all this will do is return key. Likewise, public, return type V, get value will return value. Okay, so this is good enough to kind of get started here. So we'll go ahead and get rid of the, back in main now, we'll get rid of the print statement and replace it with my generic class. I'll call it MGC. Let's use the bell. New, my generic class. Great. And it's getting mad at me. It says expected 2 arguments but found 0. So this is an interesting point. I have asked 2 input arguments to my constructor, and they must be of type K and of type V. What are type K and type V in this case? How do I know what to input into the constructor? Well, the issue is I haven't actually yet specified that, what those types are. And you can actually see that by this warning right here. If I hover over the my generic class that I've written, it says raw use of parameterized class my generic class. It's kind of a weird way of saying that this class you're using is expecting generic types, but you haven't specified what type those generic types should be. And so how do you do that? Well, you go over to where you declared it, and you give it the types. So for the key, I'm going to want it to be a, let's see what I have in here, string. And the type, or the value, will be an integer. I'm still mad at me. It's because once you've specified the generic types, it wants you to do this, where you specify angle brackets here. You could put string, integer in the angle brackets here, but it's just going to tell you that it's unnecessary. You don't really need to do this. I'll leave it here and show you in a second what happens. But so yeah, now it's expecting, if you remember in my generic class, the first input is of type k, which is now of type string. So k should be string. And the second input is type v, which, based on its placement here, is going to be type integer. And so I'll give it a string. Let's do, I don't know, my first, oh no, here we go. Special key. And then let's give it an integer value. I don't know, we'll give it 5. So remember, this is where some auto boxing is occurring. So I've given it a primitive type, but then since I've specified the wrapper class, the integer wrapper class, 5 gets auto boxed or wrapped and becomes an integer object. And as you can see here, string and integer have been grayed out. Basically what it's saying is, you don't need to put these here. We already know that you specified k and v to be string and integer, so I'm going to get rid of them. Okay, so this is great. Now we gave some methods to our class, getKey and getValue. And so you can see, right, k is going to get replaced with string. So getKey is going to return a string. And getValue, well, the v is replaced by integer. So the getValue will now return an integer. So we can test this. We can do a print statement, system.out.println mgc.getKey, and it's going to print a special key. Likewise, system.out.println mgc.getValue, and this is going to print out 5 because that's what I've specified to be the value. So we run it, and there you go, special key and 5. Okay, and one last part to this example. So I've used 2 here. Now if I wanted to add a third generic type, which is usually quite rare, but I'm sure there's use cases for this. I'm going to go ahead and add type E. You can see if it's grayed out like this, if you're using the Eclipse, it says type parameter E is never used. So we'll go ahead and create one. Private E, we'll call this, I don't know, value 2. We'll update our constructor, this dot value 2 equals value 2, and then we'll go ahead and create a getter for it. Public E get value 2 return value 2. Great. Just to show you some interesting things, if I try to specify return value here, it gets mad at me because it knows, okay, even though I don't know what types E, V, and K are, I know that your method has specified the return type to be of type E. And there's no guarantee that type E, will be the same exact type as type V. And so when we're trying to return value here, which is type V, you get a discrepancy between the specified return type and what type you're actually returning. Now, of course, due to the nature of generic types, it's possible that E and V could be the same type. And actually, I'll show you that in a second here. But you can't know that ahead of time. So in this case, I'll switch it back to value 2. We'll go back to my main. So now it's getting mad at me. Why is it getting mad at me? Well, you can see here wrong number of type arguments. I've given it 2, but it requires 3. That's that E generic type that I just added. So I'm going to go ahead and also make this an integer just to show, yeah, you can have 2 different or 2 of the same type, and basically what this means is V will be of type integer and E will be of type integer. And of course the constructor is expecting one more thing, so we'll give it 10. It's the value for value 2. And we'll go system .out.println if I could type mgc.get value 2. Great. Okay, so we'll print this, and it should be special key 5 and then 10. Just to show you, once you've specified the types here, you can't really go back on your decision. So you've specified this E to be an integer, and value 2 here is going to be type E, integer. But if I give it something, let's say, I don't know, a Boolean, say false, it's going to get mad at you. But this is where the error warning is a little strange. So it doesn't tell you that your input here is incorrect. It's telling you that you cannot infer arguments. And what that is saying is, okay, well, you have specified the generic type for type E to be integer. Yet, in the constructor here, where you're going to input, what you're inputting should match what you've specified to be type E. But in this case, you've given me a Boolean, which is not an integer. So this is the warning that you'll get. It's a little vague. It's not very descriptive, but now you know. So basically it's saying, okay, these need to match. So either you need to go to integer and change this to Boolean, right, which fixes the problem, or you keep that as integer and you go to false and you make it an actual integer. Okay, and that's all I have for you for this example.